Jewellery lost, yet no body was found. Welcome to Vale Files. I am your host, Thorn. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your comments light up this channel. The case begins now. It was in the spring of 1892, one of those rare weeks in London when the fog lifts enough for the sun to paint its gold across the Thames, that a knock at the door interrupted our otherwise tranquil breakfast. Holmes, in his Turkish robe and with a slice of bread half hovering between plate and mouth, raised one eyebrow before turning to me. "You will observe, Watson," he murmured, "the rhythm of that knock. Steady, controlled. A professional man perhaps, but not one of Scotland Yard's number. Too refined, likely someone with wealth, or the habits of it." I was about to retort when Mrs. Hudson entered, announcing the visitor. "Mr. Devlin Rush, sir. Says he's come from Westminster." Holmes smiled faintly. Westminster. Good. I was growing weary of domestic trivialities. Please, show him up. Moments later, a tall, clean-shaven man in his early 40s stepped into our sitting room, carrying with him the faint scent of river damp and expensive tobacco. He was dressed in a well-cut morning coat, though his cuffs were frayed, and one button on his waistcoat had clearly been hastily re-sewn. His manner was composed, but tense, as though he were trying to contain a storm behind his eyes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, forgive the intrusion." Holmes waved a hand. "You are here about the bracelet, of course." Rush halted, visibly shaken. "Then you've read the morning papers?" Holmes shook his head. "Number you have the red clay of the lower Thames on your trouser cuffs, which only a boatman or someone recently off the bank at St. Mary's Reach would wear this early. You are otherwise fastidiously dressed, suggesting you were not expecting to traipse through river silt. Therefore, an urgent event at the water's edge brought you here, and the headlines yesterday afternoon spoke of only one matter: the missing Lady Wilhelmina Eastgate and the vanished emerald bracelet found floating in her abandoned skiff." Rush stared at him, mouth slightly ajar. "Remarkable. Yes, that is precisely it. I was the one who found the skiff." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Begin at the beginning, Mr. Rush." He sat, brushing non-existent dust from his knee. "I managed the small passenger ferry across St. Mary's Reach in Lambeth. It's quiet work. Local dignitaries sometimes charter a private crossing to avoid the more public bridges. Yesterday morning, just before 7, I arrived to find one of our boats missing. Not unheard of, a few boys take them on joyrides and return them eventually. But this one, it was later discovered, adrift downstream near Millbank Pier." "Empty?" I asked. Rush hesitated. "Yes, except for a pair of gloves, a copy of Persuasion by Jane Austen, and the bracelet." Holmes's voice was cool. "The Eastgate bracelet," Rush nodded. "It's known in society circles, a wedding heirloom, large Colombian emeralds, set in black and platinum, distinctive. And no body? None. Lady Wilhelmina's maid confirmed she'd gone for her usual morning row at 6. She was known for it. Weather was calm, no sign of struggle, no footprints along the bank save hers, and what I assume were the ferryman's from the night before." Holmes stood and walked to the window, folding his arms. "So, we have an empty boat, a valuable bracelet left behind, and a noblewoman gone as though the river had swallowed her. Yet not a ripple, not a scream, not a soul who heard anything." "Scotland Yard is calling it suicide," Rush added quietly. "They've all but closed the file." Watson looked up sharply. "And you disagree?" "I do. I've ferried Lady Eastgate across the river twice. She was no romantic fool, practical, strong swimmer too. That bracelet was her pride. She would never have removed it." Holmes turned. "Which raises the question, Mr. Rush, why leave behind the one object she would have clutched to her last breath?" Rush sat forward. "That's why I've come. The river gives up bodies quickly this time of year, but it's been over 36 hours. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And no sightings of the lady since?" "None. But something else, Mr. Holmes. The page in Persuasion was marked. Chapter 23. There's a line underlined in pencil. I wrote it down." From his coat pocket he drew a scrap and passed it to Holmes. My friend read aloud. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. He glanced at me, then back at the client. Either a literary farewell or a message to someone who knows precisely what it means. Rush nodded. And Lady Eastgate was recently estranged from her husband. Holmes's face lit, not with emotion, but with energy, his hunter's spark. Ah, there it is. There what is? I asked. Watson, the pattern. A lady leaves behind her most treasured possession, a book marked with a passage of passion and regret, and disappears without a ripple. And yet her body does not surface, and no one hears a cry. He turned abruptly. Mr. Rush, I will require access to the skiff, the book, and Lady Eastgate's dressing room. Watson, we leave in 1 hour. I trust this is not a simple case of misadventure? I asked, watching Holmes pack his bag. He smiled faintly. No, my dear fellow, this is the sort of misadventure that wears gloves, leaves poetry, and expects the Thames to carry away more than truth. I dare say someone will be quite disappointed to see me arrive. And with that, the game, or something far more subtle, was afloat. The following hour passed in a flurry of purposeful motion. Holmes, with his typical economy of gesture, selected only the barest essentials for the outing, his magnifying glass, his slender leather notebook, and the ivory-handled pocket-knife he used less for protection than for prying open secrets. I, too, made ready, though I confessed to a faint sense of unease. It was not the river itself that troubled me, for I have served in Afghanistan and seen strange occurrents, but the peculiar stillness of the affair. An absence, rather than a presence, lingered in the air. Lady Eastgate was missing, and yet no one had seen her leave. The cab deposited us near Lambeth, not far from the footpath that wound along St. Mary's Reach. The Thames in that quarter had a character all its own. It did not bustle like the Pool of London, nor languish like the stretches near Richmond. Instead, it brooded. A subtle, silent tide curled past moored boats and the stone arches of private docks, carrying with it an air of withheld confession. Holmes breathed it in as if it were incense. We met Devlin Rush near the boatyard, where he waited with the diligence of a man both frightened and determined. He led us to the recovered skiff, which had been tied off beneath a modest timber canopy. The boat itself was unassuming, white-painted wood with a thin red stripe at the gunwale. Its oarlocks were intact, its interior dry, save for a few stray droplets gathered in one corner. Holmes stepped aboard and crouched low. "No evidence of a struggle?" he murmured, running his fingers along the inside of the hull. "No scoring along the gunwale." She stepped in calmly, launched herself with a practiced push, and rowed eastward, yet did not return. I pointed to the single, leather-bound volume resting on the bench, Persuasion, as Mr. Rush had described. Holmes picked it up with delicate precision, leafing through the pages until he reached the marked passage. There, beneath a faint pencil line, were the words from Captain Wentworth's letter. "You pierce my soul," Holmes repeated under his breath, tapping the margin. "This is not a suicide note. It is bait." Rush blinked. Bait? Indeed, whoever was meant to read this passage would recognize its source immediately. The passage is not underlined at random. It was chosen for its emotional weight and perhaps its history between the lady and another. Do you know if her husband was a literary man? No, Mr. Holmes. Lord Eastgate is more concerned with investments than novels. Then we may reasonably guess that this message was not meant for him. Holmes straightened. Let us speak with the maid. Rush guided us through a side path and up to the Eastgate townhouse, a reserved and ivy-draped residence tucked discreetly among the wealthier outskirts of Lambeth. We were shown to a morning room where a slender woman in servant's attire stood waiting, her hands folded tightly at her waist. Her name, she informed us, was Eliza Grove, and she had been in Lady Eastgate's service for just over 3 years. Holmes inclined his head politely. "Miss Grove, I understand you were the last to see your Mistress before she departed for her morning row? Yes, sir, she replied softly, glancing between us. She was already dressed when I came in, pale but composed. She asked for her gloves and her book. Did she wear the bracelet? She hesitated. No, sir. That's the curious thing. I brought it out from the velvet box, as usual. She wore it every morning, even when rowing. But she waved it off, said she wanted to feel the air on her skin. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Was that unusual for her? Very. She was never without it. What was her state of mind? Holmes asked. Any recent distress? Visitors? She'd been quiet the past few weeks, not unwell, just thoughtful. I did notice one thing. She glanced down. 3 nights ago I found her awake past midnight. She was staring out the window toward the river, and when I asked if she needed anything, she said no, just watching for someone. Someone? I don't know who. She didn't say more. Holmes nodded slowly. One more question, Miss Grove. Did you notice a small cut or abrasion on her hand, particularly the left? The maid seemed startled. Yes, actually. A little scratch on the palm, like from a thorn. She said it was nothing. Holmes's face remained impassive, but I saw the flicker of intrigue behind his eyes. Thank you. That will be all, for now. As we departed the townhouse, Holmes turned briskly down the path back toward the river, his boots crunching the gravel with rare impatience. You noticed it, Watson? He asked abruptly. I'm afraid I didn't. The gloves. One pair was found in the boat, yes, but the maid fetched them for her before she left, and she wore them every morning by all accounts. Yet only one glove was in the boat. Only one, I said, blinking. I thought the second is missing. More importantly, it may have been removed deliberately. A glove conceals fingerprints, Watson, but it also conceals small wounds. A scratch, a mark, something she wished to hide, then reveal. And the underlined book passage? Deliberately chosen. If the bracelet was her symbol of status, the book was her cipher. I suspect Lady Eastgate was communicating with someone, not just romantically, but carefully, perhaps even urgently. But what message was she sending? That, Holmes said, stopping abruptly at the edge of the riverbank, is what we must determine, but we are missing something vital, a person not yet seen. He crouched and pointed to the silt just beneath the dock. Look here, fresh prints. 2 sets, one large, one daintier. The latter, likely the lady's. The former, a man's boot, slight heel wear, and, note the spacing, he waited. You mean to say she met someone here? Indeed, likely stood with him. Close, by the angle of the prints. But then, why the abandoned boat? Holmes rose, brushing his hands. That is precisely the question the river refuses to answer. Unless, he turned. We must examine the bracelet again. There is one last thing I wish to confirm. Rush, who had lingered behind, produced the bracelet from a padded envelope in his coat pocket. Holmes took it with reverence and held it up to the light. Watson, he murmured, observe the clasp. I leaned in. The metal was exquisite, intricate scrollwork framed the central emerald, but there, near the hinge, was a tiny groove, darkened at its edge. A scratch, I said. Or corrosion? Holmes nodded. And more. This bracelet is not merely ornamental, it has been tampered with. Look here, beneath the main stone, a tiny filament of silk, and this indentation, too uniform to be accidental. A compartment? I asked. Perhaps, or a triggering device. He clicked the clasp open, and with an audible click, a thin disc of paper uncoiled from beneath the emerald, almost invisible unless one knew to look for it. Holmes read silently, then passed it to me. The message was in delicate cursive. Saint. Catherine's bell tolls once. Bring only the heart, not the name. I stared at it. A rendezvous? Holmes's eyes glittered. No, Watson, a warning. And then he turned sharply toward the distant bell tower of St. Catherine's, where the hour hand rested at 1 o'clock. It appears, he said, We are already late." We arrived at St. Catherine's, a modest, weather-worn chapel half submerged in ivy and neglect, precisely 24 minutes past the hour. The bell tower rose like a sentinel above the surrounding rooftops, its ancient stones streaked with soot and pigeon droppings. The noon bell had long ceased ringing, but a subtle tension still clung to the grounds, as if it had echoed not only through the air, but through something more private and secret. Holmes strode ahead with his long, decisive gait, his eyes scanning the chapel's perimeter. A narrow path led around the north transept to a small garden with crumbling headstones, where nettles and yew trees seemed to whisper in corners untouched by sunlight. I followed, my hand instinctively tightening around my cane, though I had no cause, yet, for alarm. Holmes paused beneath the bell tower, crouching low beside a raised stone slab near the base of the chapel's side wall. He brushed aside a tangle of grass, revealing faint impressions in the damp earth. "2 sets of recent prints again," he murmured. "Lighter, shallower, a woman, and here a man's, heavier, standing still. Observe the difference in pressure, Watson." I leaned in. She approached. He waited. Exactly. And she stood here, no more than 3 feet from him. There's a depression, her heel perhaps. She was hesitant. He was not. Holmes rose, dusting his knees. They met here after she rowed across. She left the skiff behind as a decoy, planted the book with care, removed the bracelet, but not completely. She inserted the note beneath the emerald, possibly minutes before departing the boat. I frowned. Then Lady Eastgate planned to disappear? Perhaps, but not without leaving a trail. He held up the note again. "Bring only the heart, not the name. That is a message to someone close, someone forbidden, perhaps. A lover, a confidant, someone she trusted enough to meet in secret, yet cautious enough not to name." A faint clatter drew our attention to the far side of the chapel. Holmes raised a finger and motioned for silence. We stepped lightly along the gravel edge of the wall and rounded the corner. There, hunched over a stone basin in the side garden, stood a young man in a brown clerk's coat, nervously stuffing what appeared to be torn scraps of paper into the pocket of his waistcoat. He started when he saw us. "You," Holmes called, his voice neither harsh nor loud, but commanding. "Stay precisely where you are." The young man froze. His eyes were wide, ringed by fatigue, and his collar was damp with sweat despite the mildness of the day. I'm not," he stammered. "I don't know what—" Holmes approached calmly. "No need for panic. You are not under arrest, not yet. But you are holding something that once belonged to Lady Eastgate." The man's hands clenched, and for a moment I thought he might bolt, but he sagged instead, and slowly withdrew the torn scraps, unfolding them with trembling fingers. "I wasn't stealing," he said. "It was just, I didn't know what to do with them." Holmes took the fragments delicately. They were torn pages from a pocket diary, soaked slightly but still legible. He arranged them like a puzzle on the flat of a nearby tombstone. The fragments read, "April 18th, another letter from A, tucked into my sleeve." I shouldn't keep them, but I do. "The bracelet hides the key. He says we can leave once his part is done." "April 21st, met him at the chapel. He seemed nervous. Said something about the East India accounts. I don't care about his schemes, but I fear they will undo us both. April 23rd. Tomorrow I vanish. Let the river carry the name. Let the heart remain." Holmes studied the entries for a long while, his brow furrowed. Then he turned to the young man. "Your name?" "Samuel Wick," the man muttered. I was her husband's assistant, Lord Eastgate's. I did his books." "Yet you met the lady in secret?" His face flushed. "Only to pass messages. She said she couldn't trust the staff. I was a fool, Mr. Holmes. I thought she confided in me, but she used me to send letters. I never even read them." "And yet you came here now?" "I saw the news," Wick whispered. "That she was missing. That her bracelet had been found. I remembered what she'd said about the chapel. I thought maybe she'd left something behind, something that would explain it. Holmes's voice softened. You loved her? Wick looked up, startled. No, I don't know. She was kind to me, spoke to me like I mattered. That's all. Holmes pocketed the diary scraps. You did matter, Mr. Wick, whether she intended it or not. The young man's eyes misted, but he nodded, then turned and slowly walked away toward the chapel steps, leaving us once more in the company of birdsong and stone. Holmes stared after him. He's no villain, he said quietly, but he's touched the edges of something dangerous. This reference to East India accounts. That is not sentimental nonsense, that is fraud, possibly blackmail. I exhaled. Then her disappearance may not be about love. Precisely. It may be about leverage. He turned back to the fragments. A name concealed, a key hidden in the bracelet, a trail set like crumbs, and now we know she vanished willingly, at least at first. But the question remains, did she reach the other side? I followed his gaze down to the Thames, visible through the gaps in the chapel garden wall. The water moved like tarnished glass, its surface calm, its depths unreadable. Holmes turned abruptly. We must speak to Lord Eastgate. I hesitated. Will he receive us? He will if he has anything to hide. By late afternoon, we were seated in the Eastgate parlour, a room of sombre elegance and little warmth. The Earl of Eastgate, a man in his 50s with grey temples and the gaze of someone who calculated more than he confessed, regarded us with the weariness of a man used to avoiding scrutiny. Mr. Holmes, he said, folding his hands. And Dr. Watson. I presume this is about my wife? You presume correctly, Holmes replied. You were aware she took a boat out that morning? I was told, yes, it was not unusual. Wilhelmina enjoyed solitude. And did she seem distressed of late? Eastgate shrugged. She was often pensive. Ours was not a romantic arrangement, Mr. Holmes, but we were cordial. Holmes's expression did not waver. I have reason to believe she discovered something financial, perhaps concerning the East India Fund? For the first time, the Earl's composure faltered. I beg your pardon? Holmes leaned forward. A reference appeared in her diary, coupled with a coded note in her bracelet. I believe she knew something that gave her cause to disappear. Perhaps she feared reprisal. Eastgate was silent. Then he rose and crossed to the window. I will not be threatened in my own house, Mr. Holmes. Then do not offer me cause, Holmes replied. Eastgate turned slowly. If Wilhelmina disappeared, it was her own doing. She had no love for this life. As for your accusations, be careful where you tread. Holmes stood, his voice level. A lady has vanished, Lord Eastgate, and if her vanishing is meant to conceal a deeper wrong, be assured it will not remain concealed. We left without further word. Outside, the evening was drawing in. Gas lamps blinked awake along the embankment, their glow softening the edges of the day's revelations. I looked at Holmes. Do you believe he's guilty? Holmes did not answer immediately. Then, I believe he is afraid. Of what precisely, I do not yet know. But the Lady Eastgate did not leave to elope or to die. She left because she had knowledge, dangerous knowledge, and she believed someone would follow the clues she left behind. He looked at me then, a rare flicker of admiration in his eye. She was right. And with that, the fog began to return, curling low along the riverbank, as if drawing a veil over the path we must next uncover. The following morning arrived beneath a bruised sky, the clouds heavy with unshed rain, and the air thick with a kind of silence that London only knew when it was holding its breath. Holmes had risen early and taken no breakfast, an ominous sign to those who knew him well. He stood at the window in his dressing gown, watching the fog drift over Baker Street like slow smoke from some unseen fire. His pipe remained unlit in his hand, forgotten. "You're thinking about the bracelet again," I said, setting down the paper. which bore only a brief update on Lady Eastgate's disappearance and a curt dismissal from Scotland Yard. No evidence of foul play at this time. "I am," he murmured, not turning. "And the note concealed within it." I moved to stand beside him. "It still confounds me." "Bring only the heart, not the name. It sounds poetic, but—" "It is a restriction," Holmes interrupted. "A warning, a message that says, 'Come if you must, but conceal your identity. No names, no papers, no traces.'" "For fear of being followed?" "Exactly, or overheard." He finally turned toward me, the pipe lowered to his side. This woman, Wilhelmina Eastgate, was no impulsive romantic. Her journal entries are deliberate, restrained, the tone of someone calculating under pressure. She anticipated someone might come looking for her, perhaps even feared it. I nodded. Then who would she trust to decode all this? Surely not Lord Eastgate. Certainly not. He tapped a finger against his temple. But there's one detail from yesterday that still unsettles me. The mention of the East India accounts? No, that can be traced and confronted in time. I mean, the missing glove. He crossed the room in long strides, opened the case notebook, and thumbed through it until he found his diagram of the skiff. She wore gloves that morning. The maid handed them to her. Yet only one was found in the boat, tucked beside the book. The other is missing. Why? She had no reason to discard it. She needed it as part of her routine. Unless she gave it to someone, I said slowly. Or had it taken, Holmes corrected. Voluntarily or otherwise. Either way, it has changed hands. He turned back to the table and selected a fresh sheet of paper. With precise strokes, he wrote a brief note, signed it, folded it, and sealed it in an envelope. "Lestrade must be involved now," he said. "We need access to Eastgate's financial records, quietly. And we need eyes on anyone who tries to leave for the continent in the next 24 hours under the name Eastgate or otherwise. Someone knows where she's gone. The question is whether they intend to follow." We delivered the message ourselves, for Holmes insisted on subtlety. Lestrade, though gruff and often sceptical of Holmes's methods, had learned enough over the years to know when something delicate was unfolding. He agreed to assign a discreet inspector to monitor the ports and to request banking records under the guise of routine fraud surveillance. When we returned to Baker Street, there was a telegram waiting. Holmes opened it silently, read it once, then twice. I could see the exact moment his gaze sharpened. "It's from the boatyard," he said. "Rush says someone returned to the skiff late last night." "Returned?" "Left something beneath the oar bench. He did not disturb it, merely noted the intrusion. Come." Within the hour, we were once again standing beneath the canvas awning where the skiff had been tethered. The sky had broken into a soft drizzle, and the boards beneath our boots were slick with moss and moisture. Rush met us with a lantern and a nervous glance. "I didn't touch it, sir. Just lifted the bench slightly and saw it tucked underneath." Holmes stepped forward, pulled back the bench plank, and reached in. From beneath the bench he withdrew a folded woolen handkerchief. Inside, carefully rolled and tied with a ribbon, was a woman's glove, ivory kid leather, the left-hand mate of the one found in the skiff. And tucked within the glove's finger, a note. Holmes unrolled it. It was not written in the same cursive as the previous messages. This was a man's hand, hasty, thick strokes, ink blotched in places. "She waits, but not for long. The man with the silver ring knows, if you read this, stay away. Some things cannot be undone." Holmes stared at the page for a long moment. "The man with the silver ring," I said. "Does that mean anything to you?" "Not yet," Holmes said softly. "But someone is playing their own game alongside ours." Rush looked between us. "You think she left this, or someone else?" "Someone else," Holmes said firmly. "She had already vanished by then. This glove was planted as a message, not to her lover, not to her husband, but to an outsider." He folded the note. "To me." Back at Baker Street, Holmes laid out both the diary fragments and the new note side by side. His face was lit by that peculiar intensity I had come to associate with the arrival of clarity, though not yet resolution. "The phrasing," he murmured, "cannot be undone. That is not a threat. It is a confession." I leaned over the table. "Then someone knows what happened to her. Someone who was present, someone who perhaps helped her vanish, or tried to, and regrets it." Holmes turned, his eyes glinting. "The man with the silver ring." He strode suddenly to the mantel, seized the Bradshaw's railway guide, and flipped furiously to the coastal lines. After a moment's scanning, he tapped a name. Lowestoft. Lowestoft? Rush told us that Lady Eastgate sometimes spoke of the coast, didn't he? And in her diary, let the river carry the name. That's misdirection, Watson. She did not go down river. She went up river first, then by train. Why Lowestoft? Holmes's voice was quiet now. Because it is the one place she ever spoke of with longing. I remember her name once came up in connection with a lecture I attended, a medical symposium. She had written an article, under a pseudonym, about the benefits of sea air for women's health. I traced it back then, out of curiosity. Her mother died in Lowestoft. I frowned. You think she returned there? No, but I think she left something there. Or someone. He turned to me. She planted clues like breadcrumbs, yes. But each one serves not only to point toward her location, but to warn those she feared. This is no longer just a mystery of a vanishing woman. This is a maze built by her mind, one step ahead of us. I hesitated. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting, Watson, that we are not the only ones trying to find her. He opened his drawer and removed his revolver. And I suspect we are no longer alone in the game. We departed for Lowestoft before dawn, the early train carrying us eastward across a sleeping countryside veiled in fog. Holmes had not spoken a word since we boarded, his eyes fixed on the passing blur of hedgerows and stations. I knew better than to interrupt his concentration. He sat like a man carving the shape of a maze in his mind, fitting together shadows, names, impressions, and absence into something that, by the end, must reveal a shape. He did not look like a man pursuing a vanished woman. He looked like a man trying to find what no one else had realized was missing. We arrived at the coast just as the morning light began to burn off the mist. Lowestoft greeted us with gull cries and the salt tang of an obedient tide. It was not crowded in that season, and the streets had the washed, clean quality of a town between guests. We walked without delay from the station toward the southern quarter, where Holmes believed Lady Eastgate's trail would resume. He carried only a small satchel, the revolver tucked within it, and his walking stick, a gift from a Maharaja he once claimed, seemed more ceremonial than practical, though I knew it concealed a steel core. We did not head straight to the sea, as I had assumed, but toward the older terraces behind the main promenade. Holmes stopped at a narrow side street flanked by a tea-house and a closed draper's shop. At the corner stood a modest lodging-house with peeling white trim and 3 attic windows, one of which bore a cracked shutter that fluttered like a slow semaphore. "This is it," Holmes said softly. "You're certain?" "The mother died here. The daughter would remember the window, the breeze, the feel of salt on her tongue. When one wishes to disappear, Watson, one returns to the last place they felt known." We entered the lobby. An elderly woman behind the desk looked up, her spectacles dangling on a chain against her apron. Before Holmes could speak, she nodded. "Looking for the lady what took the top room?" she asked. "You're the second to come asking." Holmes's eyes darkened. "When was the first?" "Last night. Late. Didn't give a name. Tall gentleman with a limp. Wore gloves even indoors." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. "Did he see her?" "No," she said. "She weren't here. Left 2 days ago, paid through the week, but took her valise. Said she might not be back. Left this, though." The woman reached under the desk and produced a folded envelope. She said if anyone came asking for her, someone who looked kind but not stupid, those were her words, to hand this over. Holmes accepted it without a word. The envelope bore no name, only a faint trace of her perfume, bergamot and some sharper citrus beneath. He opened it slowly, carefully, as though it might contain more than words. Inside was a single sheet of fine stationery, folded twice. Her hand, delicate and even, filled the page. If you are reading this, then you found the first door, but not the last. The bracelet was not meant to vanish, it was meant to unlock. I have placed what matters in the hands of one who cannot be bought. He wears a ring of silver and listens more than he speaks. If they reach him before you, all is lost. If you reach him first, he will trust only what cannot be forged, the other glove. Holmes folded the note in half. So she passed it on, he murmured. The knowledge, the danger, to this man with the ring. And if he's already dead, I asked grimly, then someone is willing to kill to keep what she uncovered from ever being spoken aloud. We left the house without delay, retracing our steps toward the quay. Holmes said little, but I could feel the tension in his stride. The man with the silver ring. It had sounded symbolic, but now it became literal. A single man, unknown, perhaps hunted, holding the key to whatever Lady Eastgate had stumbled across in her husband's ledgers. We began our search near the docks. Holmes questioned dock workers, fishermen, a tobacconist who sold foreign brands, and a blind accordion player who claimed to have seen a man what didn't limp when he walked, but limped when he stood still. It was nearly noon before we found him. He was sitting at the edge of the pier, mending a net, not tall, not young. His clothes were plain but mended with care. But the moment Holmes's eyes reached his left hand, he stopped walking. There, on the fisherman's third finger, was a silver ring, worn, plain, and bearing a single engraved word, Veritas. Holmes stepped forward without hesitation. "Your name?" The man looked up. "Column Trainer. If you're looking for the woman, you're too late." "Not if you help us." Trainer regarded him, and then me. She said two might come, a clever one and a soldier. Holmes's mouth twitched. "Which do you take me for?" "She said you'd ask that." Trainer stood and dried his hands. "We can't talk here." We followed him to a small pub with shuttered windows and a forgotten name. Inside, the only sound was the ticking of a long, unwound clock and the wind pressing against the glass. He sat us in the farthest corner and ordered nothing. "She came to me because I once worked for her father," he said at last. "He trusted me. I served in India under his command, saw things no one should see, brought things home, letters, ledgers, names." Holmes leaned in. "And those things involved Eastgate." "More than him, a network. Gentlemen of rank and title who funneled money meant for the military into private ventures, opium, shipping, smuggling. They buried it in ledgers marked for colonial logistics and repatriation funds." "She found the records?" "Not all. Just enough to frighten her. Her husband had begun liquidating holdings in secret. She saw the accounts. She knew she was being watched." Holmes's voice dropped. "And you have the documents?" Trainer hesitated. "Not here." "Then where?" "I'll take you, but only you," he said, looking at Holmes. "The soldier waits here." I opened my mouth to protest, but Holmes stopped me with a raised hand. "Watson, I trust him." Trainer nodded and led Holmes out through a side door. I sat in the silence, minutes dragging, ears attuned to every creak of the old pub. The bartender never appeared. I stared at the empty hearth, and the wind made the walls sigh as if remembering too much. Then came the footsteps. I rose at once. They were too slow, too even to be Holmes's. A man entered through the front, tall, gloved, the brim of his hat low. He did not look at me, only moved past, toward the corner where Holmes had sat. Then very deliberately he turned and looked over his shoulder. He limped. The door behind me opened again, and Holmes stepped in, alone. He saw the man immediately and froze. And in that quiet, electric pause, I realized one thing with certainty. We had not been the only ones tracing the silver ring. We had not been the first. And now someone had come to erase the trail behind it. Holmes did not speak as he entered, but I saw the flash of recognition pass through his eyes like lightning behind storm glass. His gaze landed squarely on the man with the limp, tall, gloved face still obscured beneath the pulled brim of a dark hat. The two locked eyes, and in that moment the room seemed to narrow to just the three of us. The man spoke first, his voice low and cultivated. "I was told I might find you here, Mr. Holmes. I suppose the trail has narrowed." Holmes's tone remained even. "It depends which trail you mean. There are several. One leads to a vanished woman, another to stolen accounts, and yet another to murder." The man smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we are on parallel paths? Shall we speak honestly?" "That depends," Holmes replied. "Do you still intend to limp?" The faintest pause. Then the man's posture shifted, his weight redistributed cleanly between both legs. The limp vanished. "Old habits," he said, removing his gloves with precise care. On the third finger of his left hand there was no ring. His hands were smooth, uncalloused, not a working man, not a sailor. Holmes stepped closer. "You followed Column Trainer here. You intended to intercept whatever evidence he carries, and you arrived too late." "Did I?" the man asked. "You left with him, Mr. Holmes. You returned without him. Where is he now?" "I could ask the same of your companion, the one who waited outside this inn, lit a Turkish cigarette, then disappeared westward down the alley." The man inclined his head. "Touché?" There was something surreal in the exchange, two minds testing the perimeter of one another, circling like chessmen before the first committed move. I remained standing, my back near the wall, hand resting on my cane, watching for the moment when civility might turn sharp. Holmes finally folded his arms. "You're not military, despite the posture, not police either. Your accent suggests a Cambridge education, not Eton. I would place you within a private network, likely one grown from the roots of colonial administration, operating parallel to the empire but not within it, a shadow economy. You conceal your rank because it is not legally binding." The man smiled again. "You see much." "I see enough." "I wonder," the man said, "if you've seen too much." Holmes stepped forward. "If you were sent to silence Trainer, you've failed." He gave me the ledgers, not copies, originals, names, amounts, dates. Lady Eastgate was right to run. She knew her husband was only a pawn, and that the real masters would not hesitate to destroy her for what she uncovered. The man's expression did not change, but the air thickened. Then he said, "Then you also know those ledgers can't be published, not without consequence." I intervened. "Are you threatening us?" "No, Doctor. I'm explaining the weight of the stone you've begun to lift." Holmes's voice sharpened. "The weight of that stone will fall one way or another, and when it does, I would prefer it land on the right neck." The man pulled on his gloves again, slowly. "Then I'll offer you one piece of courtesy. Do not trust the maid." "Eliza Grove?" I asked. "She's a servant. She was placed," the man said quietly. "Not hired, a monitor, a signal tower, should the lady uncover what she was never meant to see." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then, if she was placed, and if the bracelet was altered, then Lady Eastgate's first betrayal came from within her own dressing room. The man nodded once, as though they had reached mutual understanding. "Do what you must, Mr. Holmes, but be swift. There are fewer doors left to close." And with that, he tipped his hat and exited the pub. I moved to follow, but Holmes stopped me with a firm hand. "Number, he's not the danger, not yet." I turned back. "What now?" Holmes stepped to the table and withdrew the envelope from his coat, the one Trainer had just given him. It was bound with wax and a strip of woven cloth. He broke the seal and removed the contents. Inside were two items, a folded sheaf of ledgers, ink faded, but unmistakably marked with entries from the East India Company's repatriation fund and a smaller note written in the same precise hand we had seen before. If you find this, then you were right to follow the tide. I did not run to disappear, I ran to finish what my father could not. These ledgers implicate more than my husband. Do not show them to the authorities until you are certain who the authorities serve. If I am alive, I will find you. If I am not, follow the name buried beneath the third page. W. Holmes unfolded the ledger to the third page. There, beneath an entry for silk transfer Calcutta route, was a note penned in a different hand. S. Merton, Devon, via Tor Valley. I frowned. You know it? Holmes nodded slowly. A man who vanished from Parliament records in 1884, former Treasury clerk, believed drowned after a canal accident, but no body was found, and the inquiry, such as it was handled by a private investigator no one could name. So he was erased? No, Holmes said, closing the ledger. He was hidden. We returned to London that evening under a sky turning the colour of old pewter. Holmes spoke little, his mind clearly spinning out across Devon, through fog-laced valleys, and into the records of men whose names had been tucked behind imperial ledgers. I watched him as he studied the writing again and again, muttering to himself. A signal tower in the dressing room, a false limp, and a vanished clerk. That night, we returned to Baker Street. Holmes made 2 telephone calls, one to Lestrade, the other to a man in the Home Office whose name he did not share with me. Then he lit his pipe and sat back in his chair, staring into the fire with unblinking eyes. "She's alive," he said at last. "I know it." I looked up. "Because of the letter?" Because she left us one more breadcrumb." He reached into his pocket and drew the second glove, the one recovered from the skiff. Then he turned it inside out. Stitched into the lining was a name, barely visible in faded ink. R.H. Cleary, Tor Valley Laundry. "Watson," he said softly, "we leave at dawn." The following morning, with the mist still rising off rooftops and the streets of London scarcely awake, we boarded the first train for Devon. Holmes had packed lightly, though he carried the glove and ledger as if they were fragile relics rather than evidence. I had seen him in many moods, restless, brooding, elated, but this was something rarer. He was quiet, not from fatigue, but from precision. Every detail, every pattern was slowly congealing behind his grey eyes. Even I, who had stood beside him at Baskerville and Baker Street alike, could not see yet where this path led. We changed trains at Exeter, the countryside now giving way to green, undulating valleys and slate-roofed cottages nestled between stretches of moorland. Tor Valley, when we arrived, was not even marked on the station map. It was a place one reached only by purpose, not accident. A trap of a place, I thought, as we descended a narrow lane toward the hamlet. We arrived just past 11. Tor Valley itself was little more than a collection of cottages and outbuildings strung along a bend in a slow-moving river. Smoke rose from only a handful of chimneys. The trees leaned toward the village as though listening. Holmes asked no questions aloud as we approached the small structure marked in fading paint. R.H. Cleary, Laundry and Dry Services. It stood alone at the edge of the village, its tiled roof sloped as if bowing in submission to time. A small bell above the door gave a single, hesitant chime as we entered. Inside it smelled of starch, steam, and old wood. A narrow counter divided the room, and behind it stood a woman, perhaps 50, perhaps older, with dark eyes and a face carved not by age, but by vigilance. She looked up without surprise. "I wondered when you might come," she said. Holmes inclined his head. "Then you were expecting us?" "I was expecting someone." "And you look like the type who reads more than names stitched into gloves." He smiled faintly. "Mrs. Cleary, I presume?" "Miss. My apologies." She waved a hand. "Hardly matters now." Holmes produced the glove and set it on the counter. "This was stitched by your hand." I don't need to look at it to know. My thread, my seam, my tag. Tell me, Miss Cleary, Holmes said gently. Was it dropped by accident or left by design? She hesitated. She left it on purpose. She didn't say as much, but I've seen too many women send signals in silk. There's a difference between losing something and letting it fall. When was this? 6 days ago. She came in quiet, paid in cash, wore a coat 2 sizes too large, and a hat that shadowed most of her face. But her voice, it was her voice that stayed with me. Steady, not desperate. Said she might have left something behind, asked me to be sure no one else picked up her things but her. Did she return? No. Holmes leaned in. Did she say where she was going? Miss Cleary reached behind her and pulled out a folded parcel, bound in twine. She left this too, didn't say what it was. Asked me to hold it in case someone worthy came. I suppose you'll do. Holmes untied the string and opened the bundle slowly. Inside were 3 items, a child's scarf, faintly perfumed, a brass key, and a page torn from a book, folded once. He opened the page first. It was from a collection of English verse, Wordsworth, I think, and the section marked was a single line in pencil. The child is father of the man. Holmes was very still. She had a son. Miss Cleary nodded. She never said it, but you could hear it in her voice when she folded the scarf, like she was smoothing a dream flat. He turned the key over in his fingers. To what, I wonder? I spoke for the first time in that room. What would she be doing with a child's scarf and a key? Did she give any hint of where she was staying? She didn't. But there's a cottage, old one, about a half-mile through the trees that way. She nodded past the back door. People used to rent it in the summer. No one lives there now, no post, no gas. But it's private. Holmes's eyes narrowed. She knew someone might come. She left the glove with you, the scarf with her scent, the key to something hidden, all timed, measured. She knew she couldn't run forever. He folded the items back into the bundle and thanked Miss Cleary with unusual sincerity. We left at once, turning up the path behind the shop and following a trail through dense thicket. The air grew cooler as we walked. It was the sort of wood that softened footfalls and blurred time. After 20 minutes, we saw it. A stone cottage, low-roofed, ivy-covered, almost part of the landscape itself. The shutters were drawn. A thin chimney sat crooked at the back, unlit. No sound, no motion. We approached the door. Holmes tried the key. It fit without hesitation. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lilac. The furniture was minimal. A single armchair, a small hearth, and a writing desk beside the window. There were no signs of struggle, no hurried departure. Only silence. Holmes examined everything. He moved with the gentleness of someone who does not wish to disturb a tomb. Then he stopped beside the desk. A sheet of paper was pinned beneath a porcelain ink pot. Not a letter, a map, hand-drawn. It was a diagram of interconnected names and ledgers, trails of coin and titles, scribbled links between government departments and merchant houses, all spiralling outward from a single central circle. S. Merton, Treasury, 1884. Below it, a note in her hand: if they find me, they erase the trail. If you find this, finish it. Holmes whispered. She never intended to vanish. She intended to pass the torch. But where is she now? I asked quietly. Was this her final stop? Holmes didn't answer. He stepped to the fireplace. There, just beside the hearth, was a half-burned match, recently used. No ash, no logs in the grate. Then we heard it, faint, from outside. Not a footstep, not a voice, a whistle. 3 short bursts. Holmes froze. She's here, he said. He turned and opened the back door swiftly, but the garden was empty. Except, caught on a nail of the fence post, was a strip of torn fabric, grey wool, same as the coat she had worn in Lowestoft. He picked it up, his expression unreadable. She was here within the last hour. I scanned the trees. Then she's still close. Holmes shook his head. "She's testing the perimeter, seeing if we were followed. She'll wait until nightfall, or until she's certain we're alone." He stepped back inside and placed the scarf and glove upon the desk. Then he looked at me with an intensity I rarely saw outside of mortal danger. "Watson, she's alive, and if we're to reach her before they do, we must give her a sign." "How?" He moved to the desk again and retrieved a single slip of paper. On it he wrote just 5 words. "The soldier waits." No name. Then he left it in the window where the sun fell cleanly across it, like a silent flag of truce, and we waited. Nightfall came slowly in Tor Valley, as if the sun itself were reluctant to turn its back on what remained unfinished. Shadows lengthened across the cottage floor, and the wind pressed gently at the shutters as if whispering a warning too soft to understand. Holmes had not moved from the window since placing the note. I, seated by the hearth, watched the light dim across his sharp features, the dusk painting him in angles and questions. Neither of us spoke. The silence was no longer empty, it was expectant. Twice I thought I heard something in the trees. A shift of gravel, the crack of a twig. Holmes merely raised a finger each time, motioning me to stillness. His concentration was absolute, his senses extended beyond the cottage, as though he were listening not to sound but to intent. Then at last the door handle turned. It did not creak, nor swing with any force. It opened just wide enough for a silhouette to slip through, hooded, small but upright. She stood there for only a moment, as though making sure she was not walking into a trap. Holmes stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Lady Eastgate," he said, his voice low. "You've come far, but I believe you've already seen enough to know we are not your enemies." She pulled back her hood. In the half-light I saw her clearly for the first time. Wilhelmina Eastgate was not as I had imagined her. There was little fragility in her face. She was pale, yes, and thinner than the society portraits suggested, but her eyes were focused, intelligent, and unwavering. A woman hunted, perhaps, but not helpless. Her presence carried a weight. "You signed the note, no name," she said. "That's how I knew it was you." Holmes offered the slightest of nods. "The glove and scarf were eloquent, but I needed to know you had not already been reached by the others. The man with the limp has been tracking you." "I saw him twice. Once near the chapel, once in Lowestoft. I kept changing my route." She stepped fully inside, closing the door behind her. "I didn't know if I'd come back here, but I left things in place, in case someone made it this far. I didn't expect you to be among them." "You should have," Holmes replied. "You built a pattern from silence. I've been listening for it since your name first entered the morning paper. You never intended to vanish completely. You intended to be found by the right mind." She sat at last in the small chair by the hearth. Her hands were ungloved. A faint scar marked her left palm. "I couldn't trust anyone else," she said. "They watch everything. Letters, friends, even the staff. Eliza, I thought she was loyal." "She wasn't," I said. "But she wasn't clever either. The bracelet, she tampered with it, didn't she?" "She was instructed to. I found the altered clasp 2 weeks ago. I suspected even before then. I began planting things after that. Notes, references, misdirections. She'd report them, of course, but I knew she wouldn't understand the sequence. It wasn't for her." Holmes sat across from her, the desk between them. "You found the ledgers your father kept?" "Yes, hidden behind the baseboards of the old townhouse in Marylebone. He died before he could bring them forward. He must have known they'd come for him if he tried." "And your husband?" "He's part of it. Not the architect, but the inheritor. He believed he was protecting something noble, the stability of the empire. But money has no loyalty, Mr. Holmes. It only knows direction." I followed the names. I saw where they intersected. Contracts, pensions, false repatriation claims. It was a machine. "You left your husband to follow the truth?" I left because I realized he would never stop me. He'd simply let others do it for him. Holmes leaned forward. The name at the center, S. Merton, the vanished clerk. Did he contact you? Number. But his initials appear more than once in the margins. He was a whistle inside the Treasury. Everything began to unravel after his disappearance. I think he gave the documents to my father before they forced him out. He's not dead, Holmes said quietly. I believe he's here, in Devon, or near it. His name has resurfaced recently through coded channels, possibly under an alias. Wilhelmina's eyes widened slightly. If he's alive, then everything changes. I intend to find him, but there's something more urgent. First. Holmes opened the desk drawer and withdrew the map she had drawn, the one connecting the names and titles. This chart is dangerous. It names men currently holding office, nobility, judges, colonels. I know, she said. That's why I didn't leave it in London. If anyone else had found it, they would have buried you before it was folded. He looked at her. You've risked everything, but it's not over yet. She nodded once. Then what do? We bring in only those we can trust. Lestrade has assigned 2 men to monitor outbound activity from London's ports. If any attempt is made to leave the country with these documents or silence them, we'll know. And the others? Holmes's face grew more severe. They will try to strike before that, likely tonight. At that she stood. Then we don't stay. Number, we give them what they want to see. He turned to me. Watson, you'll remain here with Lady Eastgate for the next hour. Light the fire, draw the curtains, let the candle burn. When they come to check the perimeter, they'll see a woman hiding, a soldier waiting. And you? I asked. Holmes stood. I'll walk down to the Tor River and leave a second trail, one that doubles back through the wood. When they follow it, I'll know which direction they came from. Wilhelmina looked at him. And if they don't follow? He gave her a smile that held no warmth. Then they're already here. He left then, silent and swift, his figure swallowed by the dark beyond the window. I moved to the hearth, struck a match, and lit the fire. Its glow filled the room with a kind of steadied breath. Lady Eastgate stood beside me, watching the flames, her arms folded, her face unreadable. He's more than I expected, she said quietly. He always is. And then we waited again, the silence no longer expectant but charged, like a string pulled too tight. Somewhere outside, a twig broke. The fire shifted. A breeze moved the edge of the curtain. And we knew the night was no longer alone. We heard it again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. The deliberate pause before movement, the absence of animal panic. This was no deer or fox disturbed by the hearthlight. Someone was watching the cottage, not boldly, not yet, but closely enough to judge whether to enter. Lady Eastgate turned toward me, but I raised a hand. We kept our positions near the fire, just as Holmes had instructed. I watched the flicker of flame shift across the window panes, casting shadows that might mislead any onlooker into thinking we were unaware. Then from somewhere behind the house, a shape moved past the window. It didn't linger, it didn't knock, but it passed close enough that the curtain's edge stirred as if disturbed by more than wind. I stepped carefully to the desk, retrieved Holmes's revolver from the drawer, it had been left there purposefully, and returned to the chair beside the hearth. Lady Eastgate had seated herself again, her spine straight, despite the flicker of apprehension I saw tighten her knuckles around the armrest. "They'll come through the rear," I murmured. "If they believe we're alone?" She nodded once, her face composed. "And if they don't?" "Then we're already surrounded." For several long minutes, the only sounds were the steady crackle of the fire and the faint hum of wind against the glass. I could not help but recall the words of the man at the pub in Lowestoft, "Some things cannot be undone," and I wondered if this was what he meant, the moment when silence became a blade and watching became striking. A knock came, Not at the front door, but the rear. Software 2 taps. Then silence. Neither of us moved. Then came the sound of the latch. The door did not creak. It opened with surgical control, just as Holmes had done earlier. A footstep followed, slow, careful. Then another. They paused. And then Holmes's voice, sudden and sharp. "Close it." The figure froze. "Now," Holmes added, "or you'll never feel the needle." There was a brief silence. Then the door creaked shut once more. I stood and stepped to the rear corridor, revolver raised, Lady Eastgate close behind. Holmes was standing just inside the threshold, one hand outstretched, holding what looked like a brass hatpin poised against the intruder's neck. The man, perhaps in his 30s, was dressed like a gamekeeper, but his boots were London leather and his collar was too stiff for a field man. He held his hands up slowly. "I didn't come to harm anyone." "Yet you came armed," Holmes replied, glancing at the knife holstered beneath the man's coat. "And uninvited." "They sent me to verify," the man said quickly. "Only that. I wasn't to touch her." "They who?" Holmes asked. The man licked his lips. "They didn't give names." Holmes's gaze narrowed. "But you saw their faces." A pause. "One," the man admitted. "The tall one, limpio, gloves." Holmes stepped back. "Watson, relieve him." I retrieved the knife from the man's coat and patted down his pockets. No weapon, but he carried a folded letter sealed in black wax. Holmes opened it with a flick of his wrist. Inside was a list, names, locations, notations in shorthand. At the top, if retrieval fails, proceed with silencing. Holmes turned to the man. "Do you know what this is?" "I don't ask," the man muttered. "I just carry." "Very good," Holmes said. "Then you won't object to carrying it straight back, with a correction." He strode to the desk, retrieved a pencil, and wrote in the margins of the list, "The files were already moved. The soldier never left." He folded it again, returned it to the man's coat, and nodded once. "You will leave by the same path. You will not speak of this visit to anyone, and you will wait for them to contact you again. If you deviate by a single syllable, I will know." The man's eyes darted between the three of us. "And if they don't believe me?" "They will," Holmes said, "because I want them to." He stepped aside. The man hesitated only briefly, then slipped out into the dark. Holmes shut the door and bolted it. "They'll fall for the bait?" I asked. "Momentarily, long enough for us to move." He turned to Lady Eastgate. "Your map, your ledgers, we carry them now." She retrieved the satchel. Holmes added the glove and scarf from the window. "We're going to walk through the woods," he said. "They'll expect us to stay. They won't check again until the morning." "And where will we go?" she asked. "To Merton." "The clerk?" I asked. "But we don't know where—" I do," Holmes said. The final note in her map, a name scratched into the corner. It wasn't a signature, it was a location, Crossley Mill. An abandoned textile station 2 miles from here, converted years ago into private storage. Lady Eastgate exhaled. That was where my father first met him. I remember now, he called it the circle beneath the wheel. I thought it a metaphor. Holmes was already at the door. In these affairs, metaphor and geography are rarely separate. We slipped into the night with no more than a lantern dimmed low. The trees closed around us, hushed and watchful. The trail curved downward, following the river's edge until the faint outline of a mill emerged, a broad-shouldered building of blackened stone and rusting rails. Holmes led us round the back, where a narrow arch had once housed grain deliveries. He knocked twice, then once. There was silence. Then a bolt slid back. The door creaked open, and a man stood there, thin, silver-haired, with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen far more than they had ever spoken. He looked first at Holmes, then at Lady Eastgate. He said her name softly, not her title. "Wilhelmina," and she whispered, "Merton." Then he opened the door fully and stepped aside. Holmes waited until we were all inside before he spoke. "We have the documents, but we are not alone in wanting them." Merton nodded. Then we must move faster than the ones who do. And behind him, lit by a single lamp suspended above a steel desk, lay the full archive of a conspiracy stitched in silence. Ledgers, seals, account transfers, signatures burned by names no one dared to speak aloud. And somewhere outside, in the dark, the men without names had already begun to converge. The door sealed behind us with the rasp of old iron, and for a moment the stillness inside the mill pressed against the air like another wall. The space was vast, hollow, and mostly bare, save for the long desk at the center, its wooden surface darkened by time and layered with paper, ledgers, ink bottles, and the mechanical skeletons of dissected clocks and coded machines. The light above it swung gently, casting elliptical shadows across the floor like a pendulum between revelation and risk. Merton stood in its glow, his shoulders narrow beneath a thick wool coat, his hands steady as they sorted through an open folio. Despite the long years of hiding, he had the clarity of someone who had not merely survived, but had waited. "You came," he said, not looking up. "We followed," Holmes replied. "As did others." "I know." He lifted a page and passed it across the desk. Lady Eastgate stepped forward before either of us, her fingers brushing against the parchment like one might touch a wound. "This is my father's hand," she said softly. "The second ledger." "He gave it to me the year before he died," Merton murmured. "Told me never to surface unless two names converged again, Eastgate and Vanthorne." Holmes inhaled. "Vanthorne? It's on the list we recovered in Lowestoft." Merton nodded. "A diplomat in Calcutta? Oversaw several land repatriation schemes. Your lady's husband was one of his backers, through shell accounts. When Vanthorne died suddenly, drowned, supposedly, the web collapsed inwards, but not before certain sums disappeared into the untraceable." "And my father?" Wilhelmina asked. "He tried to publish, quietly, through back channels. It didn't take long for them to find him. The story of a heart attack at his club was just tidy enough not to be questioned. But he gave me this." Merton stepped aside, revealing a locked drawer in the base of the desk. He unlocked it and withdrew a flat tin box, the edges reinforced with iron. Holmes said nothing, but his eyes sharpened the moment it was opened. Inside was a single sheet of ivory stationery, a bank record from Zurich, dated 1883, an amount scrawled in careful ink, and beneath it, a name. We all leaned in. It wasn't Eastgate, nor Merton, nor Vanthorne. It was the name of a sitting cabinet minister, a man Holmes and I had seen once at a political gathering on Pall Mall, his laugh too loud, his eyes too still. I whispered it aloud. Holmes simply nodded. It was always going to be someone in plain sight. Merton closed the box and re-secured it. "With this we can prove a link between Crown resources and the shadow economy in India. It's more than blackmail. It's treason, if framed correctly." "And if framed incorrectly?" I asked. "They call it madness," Wilhelmina said, "or suicide." Holmes turned to the wall where a map of England had been pinned, lines drawn between cities, some marked in red, others in black. "We need to move this to someone beyond their reach." "They'll expect you to take it to the press," Merton said. "I won't," Holmes replied. "Not directly." He moved to the desk and unrolled Wilhelmina's previous map, the ledger web, now more complete with the names Merton had preserved. He laid it beside the Zurich page. "We'll divide the evidence, some to Lestrade, some to an editor, I trust, but the originals, these, must go abroad." Wilhelmina frowned. "Abroad?" "Zurich," Holmes said. "Let the trail circle back to the place they last considered safe. When they see the wound has reopened from the inside, they'll panic, and panic leads to mistake." "But they're already circling," I said. "The man we turned away, he'll report by morning. We have hours at most. Then we leave now." But Merton did not move. "I can't go with you." Holmes turned. "They'll come here." "They already know I'm dead," Merton said with a calm finality. "If I leave, they'll realize the story was false. But if I stay, if I remain a ghost, the game remains uneven. You'll be killed, I said. Not if I vanish properly this time. He moved to a corner of the mill and lifted a floorboard with an ease that revealed long planning. Beneath it was a shallow crawl space packed with tinned food, a water barrel, and bundles of clothing. I've lived off-grid before, he said. I'll do it again. Just make sure this, he gestured to the box, doesn't die with me. Holmes looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and passed Merton a slip of paper. This will reach me through a dead letter drop in Paris, he said. If anything changes, if you are compromised, send nothing but the word mirror. I'll come. Merton tucked it into his pocket without reply. We packed quickly. Lady Eastgate moved with silent determination, sliding the Zurich document into a protective sleeve and tucking it inside a leather folio. I watched her as she worked, this woman who had begun as a silhouette on the Thames and now stood in a mill with the names of empires in her hands. There was no trace of fear in her face, only purpose. Holmes extinguished the lamp. The rest of the room folded into shadow. We left through the east exit, stepping onto the wheel path just as dawn began to bruise the edge of the sky with its first smear of colour. The birds had not yet begun to sing, but the wind carried a sound, faint, persistent. Footsteps, not near, but coming. Holmes turned to Wilhelmina. When we reach the crossroads, take the trail north. There's a carriage waiting. My name is not on the manifest. It will take you to Plymouth. From there, Zurich. And you? I'll return to London. I need to close the last gate before they open it. We moved through the trees in silence. At the fork, Wilhelmina paused. She looked at Holmes. You knew from the start, didn't you, that I hadn't drowned? I knew, he said, because you left your voice behind. She smiled once, thinly, then turned and vanished up the slope, the folio pressed to her chest like a wound or a vow. Holmes and I took the other path, back toward London, back toward the centre of the storm. Behind us, in the dark, someone whistled, 3 short notes, too late. We were already gone. It was a week before I saw Holmes again. The days that followed our return to London unfolded with swift, surgical precision, some of it visible in the papers, much of it moving beneath the surface like a deeper current. There were whispers of resignations, of cabinet reassignments, of quiet diplomatic shifts attributed to health or family. But I knew better. We both did. Lestrade had met us at Charing Cross, where Holmes passed him a sealed envelope bearing no name, only a stamp from the British Museum's private archives, a ruse, of course. Within was the first division of evidence, enough to provoke internal audits and open quiet inquiries, but not enough to unearth the deeper web. That would come later. Holmes, as ever, moved as if several moves ahead of those around him. And then, quite suddenly, he vanished. He left no note, no explanation, only an unfinished game of chess on the parlour table and a pair of boots still damp from the Devon mud. Mrs. Hudson, not unused to his habits, merely sighed and set aside his breakfast untouched for 2 days running. I, though, was less tranquil. I feared privately that he had gone back, into the circle of danger that now pressed tighter with each silence. But on the 7th morning, I returned from an errand to find him precisely where I had last seen him, seated at the fireplace, his fingers templed, his gaze miles away. "I trust you've read the morning reports," he said without looking at me. "I have. Lord Eastgate has retired for health reasons." "And the Treasury has launched an internal restructuring." "As expected." "And the Foreign Office has delayed its East India delegation indefinitely." He smiled slightly. That was less expected but welcome. I sat down opposite him. "Where have you been?" He took his time answering. Then with a sigh he stood and crossed to the writing desk. From its drawer he withdrew a single folded note, familiar, creased, and bearing a faint scent of citrus and salt. He handed it to me. I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Zurich is cold but clear. I left the gloves behind. The soldier did not wait in vain. I looked up. She made it. She did. And the documents are now in the hands of a solicitor whose loyalties are unshakable and whose office lies 3 floors above a banking consortium with no nameplate. Then it's over. Holmes raised a finger. For now. He crossed to the chessboard and moved a bishop forward 1 square. There are still traces to be cleaned. The man with the limp, he has not resurfaced, nor has Eliza Grove, and the list recovered from Lowestoft bore more names than I care to recount aloud, some of them quite close to the crown. But the worst of it is cut out. The worst of it, Watson, he said, looking at me, was never the corruption itself. It was the belief that no one would ever look closely enough to find it. He returned to his chair. She was clever, he added, not because she knew how to run, but because she knew how to be seen, just enough to draw us in. She trusted us. She trusted you, he said, with the smallest of nods. The soldier with no name? You were her anchor. The one thing they couldn't predict. I felt a heat rise behind my eyes, though I said nothing. Holmes seldom gave compliments. When he did, they remained with you for years. Outside, the bells of Baker Street tolled the hour. The fog that had haunted the windows for days had lifted, if only slightly. Enough to make out the outlines of chimney pots and rooftops in neat succession. Holmes refilled his pipe and struck a match. One day, he said, someone will ask why she disappeared, why a titled woman with everything fled to the shadows. And what shall we say? I asked. He smiled faintly. That she did not disappear. She rewrote the ending and left us the margin notes. The match burned down, the pipe lit, and as the smoke curled upward toward the window, I thought, not for the first time, that the truth, when pursued by men like Holmes, never quite vanishes. It only waits, just long enough to be found.